Good morning on this very wet, very dark and very cold day. Let's hope this story can warm us a little bit. Although, as you remember, he's a grown man now. He's Arthur, he's lost Marty, and he's now gone off to war with the Australian army. So let's see. This chapter is called The Centre Will Not Hold. Most of the world is now too young to remember a war in Vietnam. Wars become history all too soon and are forgotten about all too soon as well, before the lessons can be learned, which is also not a great thing. This is why we have more wars and always more wars, but they are not forgotten by those who fought in them. I don't forget the anger of our guns, the shudder that went through the ship when she was hit, the silence that followed and the cries of wounded people. They called it friendly fire afterwards. We were bombarded by our own side. An unfortunate mistake, they told us. It felt a little more than unfortunate at the time. Good men died for nothing that day, and I was lucky not to be one of them. These were times I do remember only too well, but don't want to have to think about. I don't want to write about them either, but I can't pass Vietnam as if it never happened, as if it had never been there. Not because I'm proud of it, on the contrary. There were long months of boredom at sea, long nights sweating below deck. I can still remember how excitement turned to fear in my stomach when the guns first fired. I can still see Dickie Donnelly from Adelaide. We only just celebrated his 18th birthday, and there he was lying on the deck, his eyes looking up at the sky, above him, and not seeing. There wasn't a mark on him. It must have been the blast that killed him. I was holding his hand when I felt the last breath go out of him. But apart from Dickie Donnelly, most of the dying in the war was done far away, onshore. I discovered it's a whole lot easier to do your killing when you're miles away from your target. You're in your ship, way out at sea, and all you do is fire guns. You don't see where they land, so you don't think about it because you don't have to. At least not to start with, not until you come face to face with it. After Dickie Donnelly, I couldn't put it out of my mind. This was what our shells were doing to the enemy, to the Vietnam people. They'd been young lads just like Dickie, with mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, an enemy that I'd never seen, and I was firing the guns that did it. All I'd ever done while I'd been at sea, it seemed to me, was fire guns. I couldn't wait for the war to end to get out of the Navy. Sickened and sad, I turned my back on the sea. Forever, I hoped. I had come to hate the sea, the place I'd always loved, where I'd always longed to be. For me, the sea had become a place of sadness. I went inland after the Navy, bummed my way around, picking up any work I could find. I went gold mining in Western Australia, worked on a cattle station in the Northern Territories, spent most of my time branding cattle. I did seasonal work picking grapes in vineyards outside Adelaide, in the Clare Valley it was. And after that I was a jackaroo for a while on a sheep station near Armidale in New South Wales. After that I never wanted to look at another sheep in my life. Back-breaking work, smelly work. At times I felt like I was back at Cooper's station. I couldn't settle anywhere, not for long. I kept moving on, moving on. I wasn't leaving anywhere, I wasn't going anywhere, I was just drifting. I still wore Kitty's key around my neck, I never took it off, not once. But I'd long since stopped believing that it was lucky. I wore it mostly out of habit, and maybe because I still thought I might one day be able to go back to England and find Kitty. Find out if she'd ever existed even, find out what the key was for. But I never did, and I know why. I was frightened of discovering the worst, that she had never existed, that I'd made her up, so as not to feel entirely alone in the world. I still thought about the key, though, when I caught sight of it in the mirror when I was shaving. I thought about it every time I touched it, but any real hope I had harboured of actually ever doing anything about it was fast fading, along with my sanity. My centre would not hold. I don't know why it happened when it did. None of it really makes much sense to me now. I was there. If there was a physical cause that triggered my troubles, and when it comes to health I don't think body and mind can be separated, then it might have been because of lack of sleep. No matter how exhausted I was after a day's work, I couldn't get to sleep. I'd lie there, not tossing and turning, just thinking. And no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept coming back to it. It was always the killing. It was the shining tuna lying on the deck bleeding, fighting for its life. It was Dickie Donnelly his last breath on my warm hand. But there was another picture that haunted me, that would not go away when I closed my eyes. I'd seen it first as a black and white photo in a magazine, I think, then in a film on the television. It was an image of a young girl in Vietnam running down the roadway from her village. She had been burnt by a bomb. She needed help. She was coming towards me. She was there crying, and she kept coming towards me, holding her arms out, and suddenly her face would be Kitty's face. I knew I'd been part of the war that had done that to her, to a girl just like Kitty, to thousands and thousands of others too. Every night she was there, and every night I couldn't sleep. I'd be late for work in the morning, or I'd fall asleep on the job. Then I'd get the sack. Time and again I got the sack. Any money I did earn I'd gamble away the same day I got it. I'd hitch a ride anywhere and have no idea where I was when I arrived, nor where I was going or why I'd gone there. I felt myself slipping into a deep, dark hole of despair. I couldn't find any way of stopping myself, and in the end I didn't even want to stop myself. It seemed a lot easier just to give up and let go, so I did. I woke up in hospital. They told me I'd drunk a bottle of whiskey. The doctor said I was lucky. Someone had found me in time. I didn't think I was lucky at all. He wanted to keep me in hospital for my own safety, he told me. I'd had a breakdown, he said. It was an illness like any other, and I'd have been hospitalised until the treatment was over. I'd gathered pretty soon that it was the kind of hospital you could leave only when the doctor said you could. I looked out of the hospital window and saw the sea. I asked where I was. Hobart, Tasmania, he said. When he went out, he locked the door behind him, just as Mr. Piggy had at Cooper Station. I was a prisoner again. So there I was, over 45 years old by now, rock bottom, losing my mind, and in some hospital in Hobart. And I don't remember to this day how I got to Hobart, but I still had Kitty's key around my neck. The doctor asked me a lot about my childhood, and I showed him my key and told him about Kitty too. He asked if I hadn't made Kitty up entirely. Hadn't I invented her because I so much wanted her to exist, wanted to have a family? He was a strange man, my doctor. He never smiled, not once. But to be fair to him, he didn't get angry either, and I gave him enough cause to get angry. Thinking back, I treated the poor man a bit like a punch bag. He didn't seem to mind, he just let me rant on. Nothing rattled his professional calm. I had the strong impression he didn't believe a word I told him, and I don't think he cared that much either. So after a while I didn't tell him anything anymore. We'd sit there having long silences together, and I'd gaze out of the window at the sea and watch the boats. It was during one of those silent sessions that I felt the stirrings of a new longing. I wanted to build boats again, to sail them. I'd sit in my room and recite the Ancient Mariner, aloud, over and over again. It made me feel like I was out there at sea, and it reminded me of Marty and Auntie Meggs. And I remembered too I'd sing London Bridges Falling Down very loudly in the shower. I loved my showers, and singing made them even better. I was sad and alone, very alone, grieving for everyone I'd loved, everyone I'd lost. Then one morning, there was this new nurse on the ward who smiled at me, not because she was trying to be kind, but because she was kind. She treated me like a person, not a patient. My whole world lit up every time I saw her. I was mesmerised, not just by her gentle beauty and her shining black hair. It was the sound of her laughter, her sheer exuberance that lifted my spirits and made me feel lonely without her. When I told her about Kitty's key and Cooper Station and March and Auntie Meggs and Vietnam, she listened. She wanted to know more. When I recited the Ancient Mariner to her, she listened. Bit by bit, every time I saw her, I felt myself coming together again. I made a model boat for her, a liner with 3 red funnels. I was beginning to see a way out of my darkness, and once I could see the light, then I knew I could climb a path towards it. So that's what I did, and when I walked out of that hospital a couple of months later, my nurse was waiting for me. Zita, she was called, and I knew as she drove me away that morning, she was all I'd been looking for all of these years. I found more than just happiness with Zita. I found myself again, then a home too, and an entire family. Best of all, I now had a reason for living. Oh, lucky man. What Zita had done was to restore my faith, and not just my faith in myself, but in the wider world around me too. When you're down and out and you get thinking only how bleak and brutal the world is, the more you believe it, the more you expect things to be like that, the more they prove to be like that. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the spiral I was in. What Zita has showed me since the day I first met her is that the world isn't like that. Most people aren't like that. I'm not like that. She didn't do it by telling me, by preaching to me, but just by being who she is. Genuinely good people are like that. The sun shines out of them. They're warm right through. Zita's like that. As the song goes, and songs do get it right sometimes, when she smiles, the whole world smiles too. She was half my age, and she chose me to love. If she hadn't have told me first, I'd have never dared tell her back. Oh, lucky man. She came from a family of smiling people. That's where she took me the day we drove away from hospital, to her family in her home down by the seashore in Hobart. There was a whole tribe of them, the most extended family I'd ever met. Greeks, all of them, Cretans, dozens of them, and loud with laughter. When they weren't crying, that is. They are people of extremes, wonderful people. They welcomed me at once as one of their own, and that meant everything to me. I was Zita's man, so I was part of the family, no questions asked. They were all open-hearted and whole-hearted. The children climbed on my knees the first lunchtime. They tugged me by my fingers towards the sandpit, or the swing, or the beach. They found a new great big puppy to play with. I laughed with them in the sunshine, just as I had laughed with Marty at the Ark all those years before. From that day on, I knew I had a proper home and a proper family of my own, and I danced for the first time in my life. I danced, Cretan dancing. Zita taught me, tutored me through the awkward stage where my feet simply refused to step to the music, told me to feel the music, to let the music do it. It worked, but I'll never dance like a Cretan like Zita. You can see the music floating through her. She's wonderful to watch. But there was more. Zita hadn't mentioned it before. Maybe she left her father to tell me himself. Zita, she say you like boats, Arthur? The old man said after lunch as we walked together by the seashore. He had a truly wonderful white moustache, which when he stroked it often, not out of affection, but rather not out of affectation, but rather out of affection, I think. There was a glint in his eye that demanded and expected an answer. You didn't have conversations with Zita's father. He talked, you listened. Me too, he went on. I like boats. I grew up with boats. When I was a little boy on Crete, now I have my own boatyard, Stavros boats. Now I build my own boats, big ones, little ones, fat ones, thin ones, anything that sell. And I build good boats too, the best boats. We all build boats, the whole family. You can help us, yes? He didn't wait for a reply. That's good, that's good. He stopped then and turned to me. I want Zita to marry a good Cretan boy, young and strong. But she says she wants to marry you. Zita, she like her mother, you don't argue with. So you're not a Cretan boy and that's not your fault. And you're not young, that's not your fault either. She like you and you like boats, and that's good enough for me. I was like the cat that had got the cream and fell off his feet all at once at the same time. And it got better too. Within a month or two I was married to Zita, and I was designing all the old man's boats for him and making models for the children. We lived together in the huge family home adjoining the boatyard, where everyone had their own chair on the veranda, even me, my wedding gift from Zita's father. Then came the icing on the cake. I know you're not supposed to mix metaphors, that cats get the cream and the icing on the cake hardly seem compatible, but to describe this supreme moment of my life, I needed all the metaphors that I could lay my hands on, and there's another one. Before I knew it, Zita and I had a little girl of our own, Ali. Alexis, really, but I've never called her that. Everyone else does, but to me, she was always Ali. She's got your nose, Zita told me. Luckily for me, that's all she's got of me. The rest is perfect. I have to say that because it's Ali who's writing my story down at this moment, typing this all out for me on her word processor. But it happens to be true. She types as fast as I can speak, which is amazing. But then she's always been amazing to me. Ever since she was born nearly 18 years ago, it seems like yesterday. Down in the old man's boatyard, I was adapting Mr. Dodd's designs for ocean-going yachts, for dinghies, for motorboats too. For the first time now, I had the opportunity to imagine a boat, to dream it up first in my head like a story, then sketch it and design it and build it. But all the while I kept Mr. Dodds' principles in mind, that a boat should be built to dance with the sea, not just to go fast or look sleek. I had one or two arguments with my new father-in-law about this, but as soon as he found my designs were selling well, he was more than happy to let me do what I wanted. One boat I conceived, designed and built, all with my own hands. I never let anyone else go near it, or even see it until I'd finished it, and then the first person's seat was Ali. I called her Kitty. It came into my head, it just seemed a good idea at the time, and Ali liked it saying it over and over, so the name stuck. Kitty was bright yellow and built to sail the roughest waves in Ali's bath, to survive close encounters with her plastic ducks and loafers. Based as usual on one of Mr. Dodd's designs, Kitty was sturdy and sound, the most bath-worthy boat ever built. Ali couldn't turn that boat upside down even if she wanted to, and she tried often enough. Turn Kitty over and she'd pop just right back up again. When she grew bigger, I built her a bigger boat, Kitty 2. I called this one to sail on the pond. I built her a bigger boat, Kitty 2 I called this one, to sail on the pond, yellow again and fully rigged. Mr. Dodd's designs I discovered worked every bit as well in the sea, or the pond, or the bath. And just as soon as she could walk, I made her first real sailing boat, a dinghy, Kitty 3. This was big enough for the three of us to go sailing together in her. Once on Christmas Day, Ali insisted on taking the tiller, so I let her. As she took us out to sea that day, she began singing her favourite song, London Bridge is Falling Down. Can't think of who taught her that. Ali was a natural sailor. It came, I'm sure, from starting so young. I hardly had to teach her at all. She took to it instinctively and loved every minute of it. She won her first race when she was 6. She just lived for her time on the water. Every day after school she'd be down at the boatyard, not only watching, but building. For her the boatyard was the next best thing to the sea, and she often had a canny way of making one thing lead to another. She learned boats the proper way, Mr. Dodd's way, my way, from the keel up, from the inside out, and she learned the sea because she was always out there. I'd go with her when I could, of course, but if I couldn't, then she'd pester someone else in the yard. She wasn't at all easy to say no to. Not for me, not for anyone. Even the old man, her grandfather, who was no soft touch, was put in her hands. Zita used to say Ali had us all round her little finger, and that was just about right, but she was clever with it too. She knew she had to put in the hours down at the boatyard. Whatever needed doing, she did it. She was the same kind dog's body Marty and I had once been at Mr. Dodd's yard. She was a hard worker, and the blokes saw that and liked it, which was why, one way or another, she'd usually managed to get one of them to take her out sailing. It was seeing her so at one with her boat, so happy, that inspired me to take it up seriously again myself. Watching the joy in her face, the sheer exhilaration was infectious. I discovered I didn't just enjoy sailing because she was with me, I began to love it again for itself, the way I had before. I was loving it because it made me feel alive again, like nothing else. True, the sight of a passing fishing trawler, the unmistakable lines of a warship on the horizon, could still trouble me, but it was the heady, happy days with Marty I remembered most, and now I was out there again, alone with my own daughter. Zita came out with us only rarely, when she called them picnic days, when the sea was listless, when there was little wind, and the sails hung there limp above us. She liked it best like that, but Ali and I were bored out of our minds. It was on one of those picnic days that it happened. Ali would have been about 10, I think. The three of us were lazing there in the sunshine after lunch. I had my eyes closed when I felt Ali fiddling with my lucky key. She loved doing that. "Tell me about the key again, Dad," she said, "and your sister Kitty." I'd told her the story hundreds of times before, trying to make it a little bit more interesting each time, as you do. This time when I finished, she shook it off me and put it round her neck. "You know what we should do, Dad, when we're a little bit older? We should sail to England and find her. Could we do that, Dad?" That was exactly what Marty had said I should do all those years ago we were sailing past Dunedin off New Zealand. "Could we, Dad?" Ali asked again. "It's a long way to England," I told her. "Halfway around the world. And what if we can't find Kitty when we get there? I've no idea where she'd be." "We could find her," Ali said. "Course we can. And we'll find out what the key's for. I think it's a box. Got to be, hasn't it? It's only a little key. And we'll open it up again. What's inside, do you think?" And then I said it. I said it quite deliberately. I thought about it and I meant it. "I don't know what's inside," I replied. "But we are going to find out, Ali. I'll have to build a bigger boat, of course, but I can and I will. We will sail to England, and we will find Kitty. If she's there, we will find her. It's something I should have done a long time ago. Do you promise me, Dad? She said, looking up at me, wide-eyed with excitement. Ali, I promise you, I replied, and it was a promise I was determined to keep. I looked across at Zita then, and she knew I meant it too. I could see she was suddenly fearful, but I couldn't backtrack now. I'd promised. Everything had been decided in those few months. When Ali was older, we'd do it. We'd sail to England together and find my sister, Kitty, and discover what my lucky key was really for. On the way back home that evening, I was already designing the boat in my head. Kitty 4, she would be called. We'll leave it there. What a life this man has had. So, he's on his way to finding his sister. I wonder what we will hear tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day, Year 4. Good luck. See you later.